Imagine, for a moment, a place of absolute tranquility, where you feel at peace with yourself. Now, reflect on how difficult it seems to reach that state amidst the rush of life and the demands of the modern world. It's as if we are constantly seeking approval, trying to meet impossible standards, or battling an internal critical voice that never gives us rest. Buddha, in his wisdom, left us a powerful reminder. You, as much as anyone in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection. This quote invites us to pause, to take a moment and reassess the way we treat ourselves. In our society, we often confuse self-love with selfishness and view self-criticism as a necessary virtue. But does this harsh perspective on ourselves truly help us grow? Or does it simply increase the suffering we carry daily? In this video, we will explore how Buddhist teachings can help us transform our relationship with ourselves. We will discover how practicing self-love and self-compassion is not merely an act of kindness, but also one of wisdom. Prepare to reconnect with yourself in a new and transformative way. Because, in the end, what we seek is not perfection but inner peace and acceptance. At the heart of Buddhism, we find a simple yet profoundly transformative teaching: compassion, karuna. This quality is not just a feeling but a skill we cultivate to recognize suffering, whether in ourselves or others, and respond to it with kindness. Karuna teaches us that suffering is inevitable, but the way we embrace it makes all the difference. Imagine a child falling while learning to walk. Instead of scolding them, we extend a hand, offering support and encouragement. Why don't we do the same for ourselves when we stumble through life? In Buddhism, compassion starts within us. To be truly compassionate toward others, we must first learn to look at ourselves with gentle eyes, understanding that our suffering deserves care and attention. It is an act of courage to acknowledge our pain without judgment and with the willingness to transform it. Self-love, in turn, is often misunderstood. It is not selfishness, nor is it an act of vanity. On the contrary, it is a commitment to our emotional and spiritual health. It is understanding that by nurturing ourselves with respect and kindness, we become more balanced and better equipped to serve the world. As Buddha said, by caring for yourself, you care for others. By caring for others, you care for yourself. This balance reflects the essence of self-love, a cycle of generosity that begins within us and expands outward to the world around us. One of Buddha's first teachings was about suffering, or dukkha, as an inherent part of existence. He taught us that trying to avoid suffering only pushes us further from balance. The key lies in accepting it as part of the human experience. This is where self-compassion becomes essential. Instead of resisting or blaming ourselves for our difficulties, we can cultivate a space of acceptance for challenging emotions. This space gives us the freedom to deal with suffering without being overwhelmed by it. By practicing self-love, we recognize that we are not perfect, and that's okay. Suffering is part of life, but we can respond to it with kindness. Accepting our humanity brings us closer to a state of inner peace. Although self-love and self-compassion are profoundly natural practices, we often feel disconnected from them. This happens because we face internal obstacles that prevent us from treating ourselves with the kindness we deserve. Let's explore 3 of the biggest challenges. 1. The inner critical voice, the relentless judge. How many times have you caught yourself saying things to yourself that you would never say to a friend? This inner critical voice is fueled by years of conditioning, limiting beliefs, and the desire to meet external expectations. It constantly compares us to unattainable standards, making us believe we are never good enough. Buddhism invites us to observe this voice without judgment, understanding that it is merely a reflection of our fears and insecurities. Instead of trying to silence it forcefully, we can meet it with compassion, just as we would comfort a frightened child, and gradually replace it with words of encouragement and acceptance. 2. The illusion of the ideal self. Another major obstacle is the idea that we need to be a certain way to deserve love. We create an ideal self in our minds, perfect and flawless, and become our own worst critics when we fail to meet this standard. Buddhism reminds us of the concept of impermanence, anicca, everything is in constant change, including ourselves. When we accept that we are an evolving process, we free ourselves from the pressure to be perfect and embrace our journey exactly as it is. 3. Myths about self-compassion, weakness or indulgence. Many people believe that being compassionate toward oneself is a sign of weakness, indulgence, or lack of ambition. This myth is deeply rooted in the idea that self-criticism is necessary to achieve success. However, modern research shows that self-compassion makes us more resilient, not less. It gives us the strength to face challenges with emotional balance instead of being paralyzed by shame or fear. As Buddha taught, true strength comes from wisdom and serenity, not harshness. Understanding self-love and self-compassion is the first step, but it is through daily practice that these qualities become real and transformative. Buddhism offers simple yet powerful tools that we can apply in our everyday lives to cultivate a kinder and more loving relationship with ourselves. The practice of metta, or loving kindness, is a meditation that helps us cultivate feelings of gentleness and goodwill, starting with ourselves and expanding outward to others. This practice not only strengthens self-compassion but also creates a deeper connection with the world around us. Studies show that metta meditation can reduce anxiety, increase feelings of well-being, and even improve our interpersonal relationships. Mindfulness, or sati in Pali, is the ability to be fully present, observing thoughts and emotions without judgment. When we practice mindfulness, we learn to accept what arises in our mind and heart with kindness, instead of reacting automatically. Over time, this practice creates an internal space of acceptance and calm, reducing self-criticism and allowing us to face challenges with greater balance. Often, we carry the weight of past mistakes, blaming ourselves incessantly. Self-forgiveness is a liberating practice that allows us to leave the past behind and embrace the present with greater lightness. This practice is deeply aligned with Buddhist wisdom, which reminds us that the past is impermanent and that every moment is an opportunity to begin again. Stories have the power to connect us to deeper truths in a visceral and emotional way. That being said, I bring you two examples that illustrate how the practice of self-love and self-compassion, grounded in Buddhist wisdom, can transform lives. One of Buddha's most well-known teachings is the metaphor of the second arrow. He teaches us that the initial suffering, like a loss, mistake, or criticism, is the first arrow, something inevitable in life. However, the second arrow is the suffering we create by resisting or blaming ourselves for the initial event. For example, imagine you made a mistake at work. The mistake is the first arrow. But instead of accepting the failure as part of the human experience, you start criticizing yourself. I never get anything right. I'm a failure. This thought is the second arrow, which causes even greater suffering. Self-compassion teaches us to remove this second arrow. We acknowledge the mistake, learn from it, and move on, sparing ourselves unnecessary pain. Claire was a young woman with perfectionist standards that led her to exhaustion. She constantly sought to meet others' expectations and struggled to deal with her own mistakes. After discovering metta meditation, she began practicing it daily, including herself in her thoughts of kindness. At first, she felt resistance. "I don't deserve this love," she thought. But over time, her practice began to soften her self-criticism. When she made mistakes, she started telling herself, "I'm learning, and that's enough." Claire realized that by treating herself with more kindness, she became more resilient in the face of challenges and, surprisingly, more efficient at work. By accepting her imperfection, she found strength in her humanity. These stories show us that self-love is not just an ideal, but a concrete practice that can be applied in our daily lives. It helps us transform our experiences of pain into opportunities for growth, nurturing ourselves from the inside out. The ongoing practice of self-love and self-compassion not only transforms how we relate to ourselves, but also profoundly impacts our mental, emotional, and even relational health. Self-compassion helps us handle difficult emotions, such as guilt, shame, and anxiety, in a more balanced way. Instead of being consumed by self-criticism, we learn to embrace our feelings with kindness and understanding. Scientific research shows that people who practice self-compassion have lower levels of anxiety and depression. This happens because they are less likely to engage in cycles of rumination and self-criticism, replacing those tendencies with a more nurturing and proactive approach. When we treat ourselves with love and compassion, we create an internal space of wholeness that overflows into our relationships. We become more empathetic, patient, and understanding with others. By cultivating self-love, we abandon the need to seek constant validation in relationships. This allows our bonds to be more authentic and based on mutual respect, rather than neediness or insecurities. The practice of self-love and self-compassion creates a solid foundation of acceptance and inner harmony. When we stop fighting against who we are and begin treating ourselves with kindness, a deep sense of calm emerges. As Buddha taught, true peace does not come from changing the external world but from transforming our relationship with ourselves and with life. Remember, you deserve your love. The practice of self-love and self-compassion is the greatest act of courage and transformation we can achieve in our lives.